Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. I'm your host, Blue Jay, along with my co-host, JNT250. JNT, how we doing?
Good man.
Good, good. Did you enjoy the games over the weekend?
Yeah, they're pretty good. Some non-exciting games and some pretty good games.
Yeah, I definitely thought Saturday was better than Sunday. I thought some of the games on Sunday were just an absolute snooze fest.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I fell asleep during the 100T Immortals game.
Yeah, some of the games are just so damn slow. But anyways, let's start getting into it and let's talk about what we saw over the weekend. Our first topic for this week is the broadcast and the viewership. Go ahead, I'll let you start off with this one.
Yeah, so just to touch, on the broadcast, many people were angry, upset, confused with the broadcast quality and just the overall quality of the LCS product. And I think
Ourselves included,
yeah,
right?
if you've seen the 1v9 last episode, then you know. But I would say some good improvements overall around the board from on the broadcast side of things. I think there was a lot less technical issues that incurred over the course of the whole broadcast. There were tons of random black screens or caster cuts during like draft and whatnot, and I think there was only one of those in the entirety of the whole of all the games this weekend. And no more audio desync problems after cutting to replays in the games. And they did some small changes to the overlay.
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't so much about like I wasn't looking for an amazing broadcast. I may have mentioned this last week where I was more so just looking for a good stream. Like we weren't looking for anything special, and they definitely improved from last week, like you were saying. Like there were a few little hiccups, but like I'm saying, all we're looking for really is just some improvement, and we definitely saw that this week. So thank God for that. However, that didn't exactly they were kind of forced, honestly. They kind of um, had their arm twisted by their star player Doublelift, who had some choice tweets, if you want to call them, who really had something to say about the broadcast. And if there's someone whose voice is going to be respected when it comes to the LCS, it's Doublelift. So as you guys can see there on screen, I'll read them out for those that are just listening. Doublelift first said, "It's actually impressive how it was possible for someone to make every wrong decision and make LCS worse to watch." So that was his first tweet, which I couldn't agree more. LCS has had a bad reputation for their broadcast, going back to Spring Split Finals last split, where we saw them spoil the finals games. So I do think it is actually impressive how you can find a way to make it worse than that. His other tweet was, if the broadcast is consistently making mistakes with the overlay, showing the wrong fiddle build, wrong replay, cringe freestyle rap, and then ends it with Sushi Dragon, it feels like a clown show. In another context, showing niche content at the end of the show would be great. So what do you have to say about his tweets that he made earlier this week?
Yeah, I mean all these tweets came out right after the Friday Night League cast, and there was a statement that was released by the NALCS. I don't know if it was like the LCS production team or who exactly, but it was with regards to the LCS broadcast. But they basically, they recognized and sort of are trying to understand people's gripe with Friday Night League specifically. It was originally created to be this sort of, it was supposed to, have some actual difference between the actual broadcast, and it was supposed to be some more of a relaxed environment and whatnot. But I don't know. As Doublelift kind of says, it just looks kind of, it's all just altogether doesn't make any sense and looks kind of cringe.
And to me, like I do think that I like that they're trying to change things. I like that they're trying different stuff. So I'm totally down with hey, maybe we can have Friday Night League have a different vibe than the Saturday and Sunday games. It just feels like they haven't found it yet. Like when I'm watching Friday Night League, I don't feel like it's much different than the Saturday and Sunday games, nor am I personally really looking for anything different. I don't know about you or how all the other viewers feel, but like I just want to watch the games, and I just want the games to be hyped. it's that simple for me. I don't need to have any. I heard them quote they wanted to have a party-like feel. Well, a party-like feel is a really vague term. Like, if I remember, like what I think of a party now is different than what I thought of a party when I was in high school. A high school party was like a rager, and now like a party is just getting together with the boys to watch League. So like, I think there's like a really big disconnect on what a party version of League could be. So. Um, Hopefully they do find it. I just think they're still struggling to figure out what that Friday Night League feel is supposed to be.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of see that like with Double Lift's last tweet, referencing Ovalie and how, many people really enjoyed her presence within the broadcast because everyone thought that she had a real good understanding of like the meme culture in North America and what people find funny and, how to make some good quality content to put on the broadcast in relation to these things. And, you know, we don't exactly know the terms of why she's not on the broadcast for this split, but it kind of does bring into question if, you know, she was taken off the broadcast because they're trying to move in this different direction. But, so far it doesn't seem to be working out.
Well, and to me, honestly, like this is gonna sound a little bit harsh, but I think she's a great personality to be the one running Friday Night League, and it's no offense to La Tigris, but when I'm watching La Tigris on Friday Night League, I feel like she is new, so there's room for improvement. Like, not everyone's going to be perfect when they first start, but it doesn't feel natural. It feels very forced, and I don't think you would get that if you had Avilee running that. However, we don't know if she was offered Friday Night League and she turned it down. We don't know. There's nothing but rumors out there about why Avilee is no longer doing the LCS. It seemed like when the season started from her one tweet that she was going to be very involved with the LCS still and making content. Other than the one hype video, I haven't seen much content out of Avilee, so I'm a little curious as to what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, just it seems like the majority of this, Friday Night League shift and what they're trying to make it sort of like a party-like feel. I remember after the spring finals ended, that's where they first sort of introduced like the Sushi Dragon and whatnot and having him on the broadcast because they basically, after the finals ended, they had this like I think it was like they didn't do some like big like recap show or anything like that. Like they just had the Sushi Dragon, doing his own thing that he does on his normal Twitch streams. But I think the problem with that is they got a lot of false like false positives and incorrect feedback because the people who enjoyed looking at that kind of content and wanted to stay around, they stayed around and watched the end of that stream. But the majority of just the regular LCS viewers just dipped after it.
Yeah.
So like I don't know, like sure it was like the Sushi Dragon was really cool and I didn't personally watch it so I can't really speak to it, but from what I heard a lot of people really did enjoy it. But with that said, the majority of viewers had already left after the stream because they weren't interested in this kind of content and it's kind of showing now when they've brought him, to Friday Night League and, the mainstream league broadcast, people don't really find that it works.
I watched it. I sat there for the whole whatever minutes. I don't know. It was long. I'm not. It's not my thing. In my opinion, it's just freaking awful. It is so bad. It it feels like NA from the broadcast side of things. It feels like they're cringe one tricks, is what it feels like. I've said this before. Like if you go and you watch LEC, they will do some cringe from time to time, but they'll also have a different variety of things that are entertaining and fun to watch. And I don't think just throwing Sushi Dragon in every week is the right thing to do, but like you said, it's much better that they did at the end of the broadcast. I was happy about that. I kept my eye on the viewership. It kept dipping down a little bit lower, a little bit lower. I don't remember what the viewership was like before when they did their Bud Light League lounge and stuff like that. But the viewership sat around 20K during Sushi Dragon, but I couldn't help but feel like there was a lot of people in that watching that stream just wondering how much the viewership will dip, because that was the reason I was watching, was I just kept my eye on viewership and I wanted to see just how bad this stuff is. I don't think I'll be watching again next week, and I am curious to see what the numbers look like next week for that. That's all I have to say about the broadcast. Did you have anything else before we talk about the viewership?
No, I think they made steps into the right direction in terms of the broadcast, but this whole Friday Night League dilemma sort of still is there.
Yeah. Um, so, anyways, like we were talking about, moving on to the viewership, there was a Reddit post. There's been plenty of Reddit posts actually about LCS viewership over the last, I don't know, year or two. The most recent one was really interesting to me. If I'll let you go ahead and take it away with the certain statistics that we found from the LEC, LCK, CB LOL, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was either Saturday or Friday that I was just, scrolling through Reddit after all the league games like I would, and I think a lot of people do. But a kind of Reddit post that caught my eye was that apparently the CBLOL being the Brazilian league, one of the emerging regions as they call them, basically has taken over LCS in average viewership, which you know, to me, that's kind of crazy considering North America is considered one of these four major regions, and now we're being overtaken in viewership by, one of the emerging regions or wildcard regions. It just, to me, that sort of goes hand in hand with, the lackluster broadcast quality, but also the quality of the games and just the quality of the product overall.
Yeah, and there's a few things that I'm looking to see, such as like, is Friday Night League really affecting it? Are people too used to the Saturday Sunday? We've only had one split of, well, it wasn't even Friday Night League; it was Monday Night League. But we've only had one split where they didn't do all the games on Saturday and Sunday. So that could be a contributing factor. I don't know how much that hurts or helps the LCS viewership. Um, Another thing is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is the play style. NA seems really slow to me, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Um, what was the other thing? There was one other thing I wanted to. Oh yes, it was more about how NA doesn't have 10 competitive teams to field, and I think that is one of the biggest issues with NA. I don't think that people are bored of watching TSM, C9, TL. It's people are bored of watching these teams that have low amounts of fans and just a really low skill ceiling, such as Immortals and CLG, 100 Thieves, Dignitas. These are teams that people don't really want to watch that much. And I hesitate to throw 100 Thieves in there because they do have a decent fan base, but as far as the level of play is concerned, they're games that are really lackluster as far as making anything significant happen. You see a lot of mistakes, a lot of sloppy play, and so it doesn't surprise me that the viewership is hurting, and I think that's one of the biggest contributors to that.
Yeah, just to give people the exact numbers going from top to bottom, but LEC has an average viewership of about 286,000. LCK has an average viewership of 251,000. CB LOL has average viewership of 176,000, and the LCS is, 30K below them with 143K. But part of it is I remember specifically within this Reddit post that I was reading, part of it is about the CB LOL and how they're getting better as a region, and they're two big football organizations, football as in I'm talking about soccer, joined the league and now have big mainstream teams. So part of it's that, but part of it is also due to NA lacking.
Yeah, and we saw NA have a little bit of success as far as like the Golden Guard, like traditional sports teams, like owning or investing in one of the two into their NA teams. We saw like a few fans kind of become fans of a new team for that reason. I do think though that that's definitely a contributing factor when it comes to the Brazil to CB Law. Like having like soccer there is huge, man, and to have esports orgs endorsed by certain orgs or even owned is a really good push, I think. That's probably one of the contributing factors. However, even with that said, I did not expect CB LOL to have this kind of viewership. And I think that just goes to speak to like maybe this is soon to be one of the main regions. Who knows? Who knows what their growth is going to look like, but when viewership is starting to compete with like the LCS, for example, it definitely puts them on the map.
Yeah. We saw teams like with the LMS who were once considered a major region, but over time with their level of play declining and their viewership declining, they ended up, I think they merged with either the Japanese league or it was the GPL, which I think is the Japanese league, or the LJL, one of those two. But they're no longer considered a major region, so I mean, something to sort of keep your eyes on maybe over these next few years, if Brazil continues to rise in viewership and their gameplay continues to rise potentially at international competition through like the play-in stage, maybe they'll become this somewhat of a region like Vietnam.
And you have to start to wonder what it means for Worlds when it comes to play-ins or when it comes to group stage. Like, what if eventually CB LOL is one of those um, main regions where like they actually get 3 spots um, at Worlds? Only time will tell. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still a little ways away from that. Um, but it's definitely something to start considering, anyways.
Yeah, I definitely think they'd be more towards like a Vietnam how they're in Worlds because I think the way Vietnam has it, they get one play-in team and then they have one their first place team auto goes into groups as a pool 2 team. But yeah, moving on to our next topic that we have, just wanted to talk about the meta again and sort of how it's evolving after week 2 of the LCS. I know we sort of mentioned this just previously, but Jamie, you wanted to make some points about NA's slow, very slow play style.
Yeah, so we see a lot of teams playing really, really slow. The one that is most notable to me is Team Liquid. This is the team that is like absolutely stacked. We've talked about this before, yet they take so long to make something happen, and I can't help but feel like if this team started to play faster and tried to make the other teams react to what their game plan is, I feel like they would have more success. With that being said, TL has looked good in the majority of their games so far this split. However, they did definitely well, they fell to EG. They didn't look too great. There was the one TP play that definitely, to me, broke the game wide open in EG's favor. Um, and that was to me because EG made the play first. They were the first ones to TP to the fight. Impact was slow TPing, and next thing you know, they lose a fight that looked like it should have gone their way. I feel like if they're more ready to be proactive and make plays, I feel like that's something that's definitely going to help them. You also see the team that is having the most success being Cloud9 being a very quick play style team. And so you got to start to wonder when other teams are going to start to adapt to what seems to be like the best way to play the game. Now, we can't ever sit here and say we've got League of Legends figured out. It's a game that adapts way too quick for us to do that. But I think that the slow play style is one of the things that holds NA back for sure. And not only viewership like we just talked about, but in actual skill level and winning games.
Yeah, I mean, just, over the course of, I think, the last 2 years, North America has been considered quite a slow region. And, at international competition, we've been seeing these regions like the LEC and like the LPL, who these very fast play styles or have sort of become the norm and the meta play style around the world. Teams that are willing to be aggressive and take these fights early and take these, you know, uh, G2 and, FPX, they're sort of known to be these teams who want to take these 60-40 plays or these 70-30 plays instead of, maybe the way that Team Liquid operates where they like to take the 90-10 players, the 80-20 plays. So, I think especially with Team Liquid and their slow play style, it's good to see that they can play slow and then they can win with that play style. But I think at higher levels of competition and moving into international competition, if they were to get there, they got to learn how to play faster. I think they're going to get dominated by these better
Yeah.
teams.
I totally agree. Especially when you watch the LEC, you will see a lot more mistakes, and maybe that's why, honestly, maybe that's why you see such a slow play style is because players are afraid to make a mistake and get flamed. But if you watch the LEC, you will see them make proactive plays. Yes, they'll mess up from time to time, but at least they're making something happen, and the games are interesting to watch. Like the meta there is a lot more team fight oriented, and it's better to watch. It's been a lot better so far this split for sure than the LCS has been. Um, Anything more on playstyles before we get into pick ban?
Yeah, I mean, just one last thing. I think especially in North America, like when teams are really starting to fall behind and the game is getting to a point where next team fight, if the winning team wins that team fight, the game's going to end. It just seems like opposing teams are not willing to take these fights. You'll see very often that teams will go down 3 inhibs and they'll just be giving their inhibs and be fighting at Nexus towers when the enemy team has Baron buff, and it's just GG at that point, and they've waited too long to to make this proactive play or take a fight, and they've basically lost the game before they have an opportunity to do so. And I think it's really poor to see from teams that they're not willing to make these mistakes and they'd rather just fight at their Nexus towers than go down fighting.
Yeah, and we saw that. Was that the Team Liquid game that we
Yeah,
saw that
it,
in? I
it,
think
it was TL
I
versus
remember.
EG.
Yeah, okay, you're refreshing my memory now. It was very much. I remember when we were watching it. I remember saying like I felt like I was watching CLG, but like CLG and TL are not on the same level. TL should be able to have someone in that lineup say, guys, look, maybe we only have a 5% chance of winning a fight if we take one right now, but let's take a fight. I don't like watching the other team just take the whole base. Make something happen. Let's go. But yeah, anyways, they gave up, like you were saying, all three inhibs. I'm pretty sure that I don't even remember if they ended up fighting. The Nexus was going down, and then they started fighting. The fight didn't even finish because they just hit the Nexus and the game was over. It
Yeah.
was so weird. So weird. Anyways, let's get into pick ban a little bit. I know you had your eye on quite a few different things as far as the meta pick ban goes, so I'll let you take it away with that.
Yeah, so week one of LCS was played on patch 10.11, but this week they were on 10.12. So we saw Volibear, the new reworked Volibear, was finally enabled, and within week two became a very high presence champion. Went 4-3 overall in week two, and I think we saw a lot of teams having some really good success with Volibear. He's kind of seems to be this very lane dominant champion. I think we saw in the TL versus EG game, just to reference that one again, it was a Kuma versus Impact. Kuma was playing the Volley Bear. Impact was playing I think he was playing Mordekaiser.
Mordekaiser?
Yeah, he's playing Mordekaiser. But oh man, I remember he was up. I think he was up like 30 CS early game, and was dominating the lane phase. And Volibear seems to be this very flexible champion, where some players like to go the Triforce Death Stance build and go very damage orientated, or for that go Triforce into tank build, or we saw Kumo in against C9, he went sort of just a straight up tank build. So I think he's a very versatile champion that wins lane pretty hard, and teams are finding success with it. So I think that's good. A new pick to come out in the top lane, and teams are going to have to learn to pick it up because I think it's a champion here to stay.
Yeah, to me that seems like one of those picks that is just going to get more and more prioritized as the weeks go on. Watching drafts this week, that was my sole focus was, all right, who's getting Volibear because this champion seems so OP. There was already so many times when you're looking to snowball a game, it's often with a dive in either bot or top lane. And now it's like being able to dive and make a play and take a few plates or then take Herald right after seems so much easier now with the Ohm Wrecker effect where Volibear can just turn off a turret. That to me in pro play is so OP, and I think we're going to see teams utilize that more and more as the weeks go on. Also, to your point about Impact falling behind, although I do agree with you that the Volibear is just a better pick, and Mordekaiser isn't going to do much there, I do think that Impact falling behind was more so a result of that TP play bot rather than the actual picks themselves. But again, I still agree with you that the Volibear would have won that lane regardless of their disaster bot lane fight, as I would call it. Anything else? What other picks or bands did you want to go into?
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of seen the same from week one with the 100% presence champions or almost 100% presence champions: Syndra, Graves, Varus, Aphelios, Yuumi, Ornn, Kalista, and Trundle. These are sort of all of these are pretty much just considered the top of the top of picks within the meta. Varus has continued to just remain at 100% ban presence, hasn't been picked once. Teams aren't letting that through. It's pretty clear that he's the number one AD. And then we see quite often these, with Varus and Kalista being banned, we're still seeing a lot of the Ezreal and Aphelios being left open as the other two top tier ADCs building Death Stance, as we mentioned last episode. Item is super broken, and if you're not building it, you're most likely not playing it correctly. But the main thing that I wanted to touch on was the jungle picks at the moment. And we've seen sort of Nidalee has become, sort of like Graves, this high farming champion that sort of plays for itself, and you put it on you put it on these mechanically skilled junglers to try to go out and dominate the enemy jungle and win through that. But teams haven't been finding too much success with it. Nidalee's actually 0-5 so far after its 5 games so far. So, do you have any thoughts on Nidalee and the jungle meta overall?
I do. So Nidalee, I actually want to see more of, despite the 0-5. However, I want to see it on Broxa. Now I know that Graves has been great. A lot of teams are really not Graves. I meant Trundle. A lot of teams are picking up the Trundle. However, who was I think it was Azale was talking about Brox's playstyle, and I couldn't agree more that like he wanted to see Broxa go back to being the aggressive jungler that he was with Fnatic and see how that works out. And I couldn't agree more. Although I don't think the meta necessarily suits that, I do think that his playstyle does, and I want to see Broxa on these Lee Sins, these Nidalees, on these aggressive junglers to make plays happen. It's not that TL's been terrible, but I do think that Brox has been outplayed a couple of times on the Trundle, and I think it would just be fun to see Broxa get to play his playstyle and see if he can really take over games. Um, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was you mentioned, oh yes, the Graves pick. Um, we're not seeing a lot of Graves, and I think that's just because he's simply being banned, right? He's been banned in 16 games so far this split. So it seems like, as far as like the aggressive junglers with the Graves and the Nidalee, it seems like Nidalee is just the second one in line because the Graves is being banned so often. Um, outside of that, nothing too crazy. We definitely need to talk about Blabber and his Olaf. I think at this point, if you're giving Blabber Olaf, your team's just trolling. I think that's fair to say. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's kind of what we're seeing with the jungle meta is pretty much every team that isn't Cloud9, they view Trundle as the best jungler in the game and the highest priority jungler in the game, minus Graves and the ones that are banned out. But just to give some numbers to this, so far over the first 20 games of LCS, Trundle is the highest played jungler with the highest win rate. Trundle's gone 10-3 so far in the 13 LCS games he's being played. But just kind of an interesting stat that I think is super important that when you remove all the Trundle games from the pool and you just look at the rest of the record on all other junglers, they're only 10-17. And obviously, the total games are going to equal 20. But like you said to note, Blabber's Olaf has kind of been C9's really been their key to success and their ways to win. But Olaf is 3-2 right now in the LCS with all three of those wins coming from Blabber. So you remove those Olaf wins, and every other jungler who's not Trundle over the first 20 games of LCS are 7-17. And I think that number is just like it's just super interesting to me because Trundle is sort of viewed as this scaling tank jungle pick. Very often we're seeing Trundle being paired with a tank in the top lane, and it's just used as this beefy front line to make way for these champions like Corki, Azir, Aphelios, Ezreal. But I just think, the rest of the league is viewing Trundle as the best jungler in the league, where Cloud9 thinks Olaf's the best champ in the league. So it's just kind of interesting to see that dynamic and how C9's utilizing this Olaf differently than all
And
the
it
other teams.
and it's so hard to judge, right? Because like when you have a team that's as dominant as Cloud9 is, and they absolutely stomp with Olaf, it's very easy to go, Olaf's the best jungler in the league, no doubt. But it's like if you put these other teams on Olaf, well, from what we've seen, they go 0-2. So it's like, is the Olaf the pick, or is it Cloud9 that's the pick? You know what I'm saying? So it's really interesting. I do not remember who the other Olaf games were. I know one was Meteos, and we
Yeah.
know 100 Thieves definitely had a rough um, schedule to start off the split with, so I don't want to harp too much on 100 Thieves. But I guess my point just remains that like it's Blabber's Olaf that seems to be the Olaf, and who knows if Olaf sees that much success on other teams. Clearly, probably not, seeing as he's not as prioritized as Cloud9 is prioritizing them.
It's just
Um,
really interesting just to see, how Cloud9 plays around the jungle role. In
yeah,
many of their drafts, they're drafting around Blabber, whereas opposed to other teams might be drafting around their solo lanes or their bot lane. But Cloud9 is pretty much the only team, maybe sort of a little bit of Golden Guardians, but Cloud9's the only team in the league that is comping around their jungler and comping around Blabber because I think they recognize how important jungle is in the meta right now.
Yeah, and Niski himself has said like he said in the interview after the game like the Cloud9 is a team they just believe right now that mid push is just OP, so they're gonna keep going and keep playing to Niski's play style, which is just shove and help out his jungler or shove and roam, and clearly there's no reason for them to change that at this point. Um, when we talk about drafting errors here, I had a few of them that you jotted down here. The one that stood out to me the most was EG against Cloud9, where we saw Cloud9 absolutely stomp EG this weekend. That may have been the biggest stomp that I've seen all year. Maybe you have another game in mind, and maybe someone can refresh my memory. But
EG CLG.
that even that was a perfect game. However, I would still say that the stomp that C9 put over over EG was even bigger. Just because of the sheer gold lead, they were up like 7K or something at 15 minutes. Like, yeah, there was a perfect game for EG over CLG, but the only reason that it wasn't a perfect game for Cloud9 over EG is because they traded the tower. So to me, like, it wasn't a perfect game, but it was a perfect game if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
But like I was saying, when it comes to draft errors, like that was just giving Cloud9 everything they wanted. They got Olaf, they got Ezreal, they got Yumi. It doesn't matter what else they draft after that. You gave them exactly what they wanted, and they styled on them for it.
Yeah, I think in that game specifically, like you said, C9 was just able to get 3 power picks on blue side, and EG chose, C9 first picked Olaf, but then EG chose to not take the Ezreal Yumi and take Aphelios Lee Sin. Aphelios and Lee Sin sort of comfort picks for Bang and Svenskeren, but it just goes to show you cannot be giving over these power picks to teams, especially C9.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any other draft errors that you wanted to talk about before we move
Yeah, I
on to our
think
next topic?
one of the drafts that I just think completely doomed Dignitas was their game against CLG. So just to give people some context and just remind people, but Callista was left open by CLG. They didn't ban it and they didn't pick it. So they chose to give Callista over to Dignitas on second blue side pick. Um, CLG responded with a red side pick of Twisted Fate, to which Dignitas picked an early LeBlanc into countering the TF. But doing this, left sort of support pick open and CLG was able to pinch support pick by banning Taric and Thresh, Callista's 2 best supports, and then stealing the set pick, which is Callista's 3rd best support. And I just think that this early mid pick from Dignitas really just doomed their draft and having a really weak bot lane and a not synergistic bot lane. I think their bot lane was Callista Bard. But I think there are these some very simple and rudimentary draft errors that teams are making, which are basically dooming them from draft. We've seen Immortals have some really bad drafts. You know, obviously their play is bad, but their drafts have not been good. Golden Guardians has also had some questionable drafts. They've ran 2 poke comps, which they've lost with. But I think there are many, many like simple drafting errors that teams are making, which are resulting in losses.
Yeah, and one other thing that I wanted to talk about with draft is, and I don't know if I want to call it an error or not, but just something that was interesting to me. I just thought of this now was the TSM game where they picked Syndra earlier in the draft, and they could have just given that blind to Bjergsen. I think Bjergsen's shown he's more than capable to play Syndra blind, and they chose to give it to Doublelift in the bot lane, which was um, I guess the only reason I question that is because we've seen Doublelift perform not too great on mages in his history, where he's performed incredibly well on ADs. So that was just another little draft maybe error. I don't know if I wanted to call it an error or not, but definitely something of note, and I thought was interesting and worth bringing up.
I think in TSM's case specifically, it's a bit interesting to see because, Syndra is 100% presence in pro games right now. Mainly, I think the best Syndra utilization is in the LEC, because specifically with G2 and with many, many other teams, but you see in EU teams are much more willing to run these off meta bot lanes or wonky bot lane picks. We see Nomad Lions running uh, fasting Senna with Wukong support, which I think is very interesting. But we see a ton of mage supports, or sorry, mage picks in the bot lane from EU teams, and it just kind of makes this when teams are not willing to put Syndra in the bot lane, or teams are not performing on the Syndra in the bot lane, it makes the Syndra pick way, way, way less valuable. I was honestly surprised when TSM actually flexed that Syndra down to the bot lane because it was a little bit confusing on my end that they decided to go with B1 Syndra. I know Syndra is obviously one of Bjergsen's best champions, but I was just thinking to myself, there's no way they're throwing this to Doublelift, so it's obviously going to be Syndra mid. But
Well, and it just goes to show how much they really value putting the Fiddlesticks mid. They decided to opt for giving Doublelift to Syndra in lieu of giving Bjergsen the Fiddle mid. So clearly that's something that's been working for them in scrims. It definitely didn't in that game, however.
yeah, we saw in both TSM games this week they went with this tank Fiddlesticks mid. I remember seeing uh I think it was either Niski or somebody else made a post about it on Twitter, just saying how this tank Fiddlesticks mid pick is now kind of cropping up in solo queue and in scrims. It's kind of interesting just for people don't know or if they didn't see the games. But Bjergsen picked a tank Fiddlesticks mid, where in both games he rushed a Spirit Visage and then a Frozen Heart. Kind of just rushing towards that 40% cooldown reduction. And I think Fiddlesticks mid is a really, really interesting pick. He was another champion just prior to Volibear. He was the most recent reworked champion, but he's seeing some play in the mid lane primarily with his Drain because or with the pre-reworked Fiddlesticks, his drain was only one target, but now it's an AoE drain, and
Yeah.
they just recently buffed the damage to minions, so Bjergsen's whipping this pick out, and it'll be interesting to see if other teams start to pick it up because I think it is a pretty decent pick if not punished early and if not countered.
Yeah, and just one last note on the Fiddlesticks is I think that TSM may use it as a they may opt to swap it top as well because I do remember saying before the season started I saw Broken Blade playing Fiddle top a couple of times in solo queue. So I don't see that as him just trolling in solo queue for fun. I feel like he would actually be practicing that for a specific reason because he plans to maybe bring it out on stage, but only time will tell with that one. Anything else on meta or drafting errors or anything like that before we move on to our main topic for the week?
No, well, and I guess and Fiddlesticks is he was reworked to originally be in the jungle, so he's also a jungle pick, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, there you go. He could be played just about anywhere almost. Um, moving on to our main topic this week, we wanted to go over each team's best and worst performing player so far this split. I'll let
Oh,
you start off with this one. I do think we might have a little bit of similarities here, and by a little bit, maybe a lot. But yeah, I'll let you go ahead and start us off with that one.
I think I gotta fix this. Oh no. Wait, wait, wait. I have to recrop it for some reason. Okay, we back.
JNT, the graphic guy, OP,
Oh, we good. Okay, we're back.
saved.
Yeah, so just to sort of go across the board with um our various picks, but for our best players on each performance, I guess we'll go by team. But for C9, we both have Blabber as our best player and Licorice as our worst player. Um, for Blabber, I think, like I was just talking about with sort of the jungle meta, but C9, they're super willing to draft around Blabber and play around Blabber. And, from Niski's comments saying how important mid push is, they really view jungle and mid jungle priority as, the most important elements in the game, and it shows.
Sorry, I was muted. They're literally putting the game in his hands, and he's absolutely stomping with it. Like, I don't see how it could not be Blabber in this scenario. He has definitely been their best performer. It's not even close.
Yeah, and then for Cloud9, we have the worst performing player as Licorice. It was with C9, it's obviously difficult to pick a worst player because I think all these players are definitely in top two of all of their roles, but I think both of us went Licorice. We've seen in the first couple games so far this split, and even in last split, just a tiny bit. But he has actually been getting pressured in some of these early 1v1s in top lane. He's been solo killed a couple times this split, once by Kumo, almost got solo killed by Someday, and then one other one. I don't exactly remember what it was, but you know apart from the early laning phase, Licorice, he's a super solid player and he's always there in team fights, but his 1v1ing hasn't been the best so far. Maybe he needs to play some solo queue.
Yeah, and I would agree with you that it's a difficult pick to find C9's worst player as a whole. However, I don't think that it was difficult to pick Licorice as far as these first 2 weeks are concerned, just because he's been the only player that has shown some weakness. And like
Yeah.
you were mentioning, he has lost a couple of lanes, and not that you would ever expect. These are lanes that you wouldn't ever expect him to lose as well. We saw the one, the misplay against Kumo in the top lane there when Kumo was playing Volibear and he was playing the Jace. He E'd a minion and knocked back the minion instead of the Volibear. So just a slight little mechanical misplay, but nothing too huge. But it did end up costing an actual kill. And so to me, I don't think there's been really too much weakness anywhere else on the map outside of Licorice. And so that's why to me it was an easy choice, despite the fact that I think he is hands down one of the best top laners and just players in the league.
hmm Then moving on to Evil Geniuses, we both have Jizuke as our best performing player on EG. Somewhat similar to C9, I think. You know, EG, they often save their counter picks for Jizuke when they're on red side, and they often also do play towards mid jungle with Svenskeren. But Jizuke, he's just been a really solid player ever since coming into NALCS. I think he had a bit of a slow start in the spring split, but we kind of saw at the end of it he was considered like a dark horse MVP candidate, and I think he sort of continued his success from the end of spring over here into summer.
Yeah, he's had some absolute carry performances just since joining the org altogether, and he started off summer split the same way he finished spring split. So definitely an easy choice for me as well. Absolutely popping off. So good for Chizuke. And then as far as the worst player, you and I both went with Zazel. What are your thoughts on Zazel?
Yeah, I mean, just for me on this pick, I was I wasn't exactly sure who to pick between Zazel and Svenskeren. I think with Zazel though, he's been on. I don't know, he's played I think two Yumi games and one Lulu game and one Braum game, but I think he's sort of been he hasn't really needed to do. He hasn't been asked to do too much and hasn't needed to do too much in these various games. He's normally reliant on Bang and the mid jungle synergy with Jizuke and Svenskeren, but I just think he hasn't done too much. I think, it's more of a product of all the other players on EG performing better than he has, as opposed to him playing poorly. Because I don't think he's been playing poorly, but you know.
I couldn't agree more. You literally just said exactly everything that I was thinking. I don't really have any more to add. It's just more so that his team has been performing well, and he's just been performing good. So next up on the list is Counterlogic Gaming. Both you and I both put Pobelter as the best performing player for CLG.
Yeah, CLG, a bit of a surprise this week. I don't think anyone was expecting that they'd be 3-1 in the standings. You know, people are sort of now starting to give CLG a little more respect. Although I'm not one to, quickly put them up there within potential playoff contention as their schedule has been super easy. If you just look at the standings, all of CLG's 3 wins have come off the 3 worst teams in the standings. So it's interesting to see, but I do think Pobelter has been the best performing player on that team. He had a really good Diana game, had a really good Twisted Fate game this week, and I think he's just been a great carry for CLG.
Yeah, nothing too amazing for me either. To me, he's just kind of been okay. I do also agree with you that like this CLG team, I'm not ready to believe yet. Their 3-1 start has not been an impressive 3-1 start. It's been bad games where both their wins have been games where both teams kind of deserve to lose, and so it's hard to pick a shining star in a mess of games. But I do think that um, to your point about the Diana, I remember him popping off in that game and really getting a lot of kills. And despite the fact that I think his plays that were made on Twisted Fate were more so due to Dignitas being out of position, he did still punish their mistakes, and so that's why I went with Pobelter.
Yeah, and then for CLG, we have Wiggly as our worst performing player. We talked about it a little bit on the last episode of our podcast, but we both don't have very high opinions of Wiggly.
Yeah, he's absolutely just been struggling. And you know what? The one reason why it was so easy for me to go with Wiggly is more so just because he's making mistakes that seem very like it seems like he's an inexperienced jungler and he's not. He's forcing ganks that don't really have any potential for kills and maybe not even potential to blow any flashes, or he's just getting out rotated on the map or out pathed by other junglers. So to me, it was a very quick wiggly pick here.
Yeah, there's not too much to say. Like you said, he does look a little bit lost in terms of, some of these things when games are going on. Like he's looking for ganks that clearly aren't there, and sometimes he's in the he's in the wrong spots on the maps at certain times during the game. But you got to give some credit to CLG for being 3-1 after these 4 games. Sure they're playing bad teams, but they're beating them, not super convincingly, but especially in the LCS, like picking up wins at the start of the split is super necessary when, most of these teams are going to get stronger as the season progresses.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And where are we at here? We're at
TL.
TL.
Yep.
Team Liquid. We got Core JJ, both of us again.
Core JJ, that guy, he's just a beast. I don't know. Like, I think, I think he's, I think he's probably, if I were to say right now, I think he's one of the top 3 players in the league. I think he's just a carry in a support role, and he just like smurfed on Hunter T with Blitzcrank in the game versus Hunter Thieves. They completely disrespected his Blitzcrank pick, and he made them pay for it. I remember he blew an early cleanse and like chunked Ryoma for like 300 HP level 1. He pretty much hit every hook against Hunter Thieves, and kind of just blew the game wide open all by himself.
Yeah, and to me, it's very obvious that the strongest point we've seen out of TL has been their bot lane. So I do want to give an honorable mention to Tactical. However, it was still very clear to me, as you were saying, Core JJ was the one carrying with games like the Blitzcrank. That was the first one that popped in my mind. Despite the fact that it's been the bot lane that's been their words here, basically where they're shining the most, but it's been Core JJ that's absolutely been carrying the bot lane, and since the bot lane's carrying the games and he's carrying the bot lane, it's an obvious pick to me.
Yeah.
After that, the two of us went with Broxa in the jungle, which was I actually did not think that I was going to be that we would both pick Broxa on this one. I wasn't too sure about your pick. Explain to me why you also went with Broxa.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is more of like the EG kind of scenario where I think Brox is not performing bad by any. He's not performing bad whatsoever. I think he's just, you know, players are just performing better than he is. I think part of it, I think, is also TL's draft and how they're going about playing all the games. Like we've said, they're very bot lane focused at the moment. We see strong picks out of Tactical and Core JJ, and I'm pretty sure Brox has played all 4 games of split on Trundle. He's sort of on this tank scaling pick. But it's more of an EG situation here where I don't think he's performing bad whatsoever. Just other players are just performing better.
Yeah, there's been a couple of plays where he's made some mistakes and a couple of instances. Like I remember he did get out jungled early on by closers Nidalee. However, that's not like closer is good and closer's great on Nidalee, so that's not the worst thing I've ever heard. This to me is more so this goes back to what I mentioned earlier where like I would like to see Broxa on other champions before I really get more of an opinion on him. I do want to see him play that aggro style, and it just feels like he's not playing his style, and I think that's what's hurting him the most. Not so much that he's underperforming or anything; it's just not in his comfort zone. So I would like to see him on other picks and see how that goes before I form more of an opinion on Broxa. As for FlyQuest, you went with Ignar for the best player, and I went with Santorin. Finally, we're not agreeing on everything. Tell me your thoughts on Ignar and why he's been better than Santorin.
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically with Ignar, FlyQuest's bot lanes, sort of situation and their AD carry role with Wild Turtle and Mash. I think, you know, both last split and this split, it was kind of bot lane was a bit of a concern, specifically ADC for FlyQuest, and I think Ignar has really been able to elevate the play of both Wild Turtle and Mash through his sort of carry performances. We saw another Rakan game from him this weekend, and his Rakan is just known to be just dirty. Like he just carries games on the Rakans. His engage
Yep.
is super, super good. He's very fluent with that champion, and I just think he's the primary reason why FlyQuest is winning these games. But obviously, do have to give respect to Santorin. It was a bit of a tough choice here to pick between Ignar and Santorin because I think they're both easily the best two players on FlyQuest. But I'm gonna give the edge to Ignar. Just I don't know. I just think his play is super super clean, and he's been able to elevate their AD carry role.
And what is most interesting about this to me is that if you were to ask me before the split who the best player on the team is, I think, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we both would have gone with Power of Evil with how much of a carry performance he had all of last split. So it's a little interesting to me that he's not even in the conversation here, where we both have two separate picks. And he's not even being considered. However, Santorin to me has been one of the best players in the league so far this split. He just seems to show up at the right time whenever he's needed, and he's been really, really good on the Trundle as well. I think he's one of the reasons why, one of the many reasons though, why Trundle's had such success so far early on in the LCS. He's been great with his counter ganks. He's been owning objectives, and for a jungler that's maybe not the greatest with ganks early, his pillar's not bad. He seemed to be way more impactful on lanes than I would expect. So I'm just really, really happy with this play. Also, I guess it should be mentioned that he was Player of the Week this week, so hats off to Santorin for that, and let's go FlyQuest.
Yeah, I think Santorin is just becoming, a very consistent player. He's constantly, he over the last couple of years, I think since start of season 9, he's just been viewed as a very consistent and good player. If you remember back to when there was that all pro teams where it was the entirety of C9, Team Liquid, and TSM, Santorin was the only player who made the all pro list and who wasn't on one of the top 3 teams. So I think he's sort of turning into this sort of Xmithy kind of player in my opinion.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to see where he's come from because he was a subpar jungler in the league for a while, and maybe he wasn't the worst jungler, but definitely in the bottom half. And so it's really nice to see a player that's been around for so long continue to get better, because we see so often players that have been around for such a long time, they just diminish in skill over time, and I think he's done the opposite. So good for FlyQuest. I'm really happy for them looking really good and getting that first 2-0 of the split.
Yeah, show up that jersey.
Yeah, let's go FlyQuest, and now it's time to bully on solo a little bit for no obvious reason to me.
Yeah, I mean, Solo, he's just been a little bit of a non-factor, it seems, in the games. Honestly, when I'm thinking of FlyQuest right now, I'm thinking of Santorin, Power of Evil, and bot lane. Top lane just doesn't really come to mind. Solo, he came in at the start of the split as the replacement for Viper. We saw in spring playoffs, Solo got subbed in for Viper because Viper was sort of underperforming a little bit. But coming into the split with Solo gaining the starting role, I just think he hasn't really done too much, and I think he's just getting outperformed by the rest of his teammates to where we don't really notice him.
Yeah, I did consider putting Mash. However, Mash actually had a pretty good first game despite having a pretty bad second game. I thought he didn't look too great in his second game, but I didn't want to give the worst player award to someone who had one bad game when there's been 4 played for a split, and I ultimately went with Solo. And I don't even know if I even find this fair, but I went with Solo because it was his lane that was heavily exploited in the game against Cloud9. Now, if you put any other top laner up there, C9 is going to absolutely run over that top laner, and that's why I feel like it doesn't exactly do Solo justice. But to your point, everyone else on FlyQuest is looking really good. This was not an easy choice for who is the worst player so far, and I guess Solo had to be the scapegoat here.
Okay, moving on to TSM, another difference that we have. I have Doublelift and you have Bjergsen.
Yeah, I had trouble picking a best player for TSM, honestly, because despite the fact that they're not inting, well, they're inting some games, but despite the fact that they're in the middle of the pack, they've won 2, they've lost 2, I still haven't seen anything too amazing in their 2 wins. I do feel like he got his penta taken away from him, and that's why I ultimately went with Bjergsen, because and this is more than just he almost got a penta, so I'm picking Bjergsen. That was a fight where they lost. Someone got picked. I don't remember who it was. I think it was Biofrost. and they decided to opt into the 4v5 fight around drag, and Bjergsen just popped off in that team fight. And so for that reason, I had to give it to him. I remember saying before the fight started, I was like, this is a bad fight. There's no reason to go for this. There's no reason to take this risk. And then next thing you know, Bjergsen's basically getting a pentakill. So he kind of shut me up there, and for that reason, I had to go with Bjergsen.
Just, I don't think it was Bai who got picked because Bai was playing Yumi and it was Corky Yumi. It was somebody else, but I don't remember who either.
Okay. Yeah, I
But
don't recall who exactly it was, but yeah.
but yeah, honestly, I think in this scenario, it's a bit of a 50-50 in terms of the best player. You know, like we sort of mentioned in the previous episode, like this is just basically Doublelift and Bjergsen's team. Like they're the one calling the shots. They're the one probably calling the plays. So I think in this situation, it was a little bit of a 50-50. I picked Doublelift ultimately because, you know, Doublelift has been carrying a little more games. We saw Bjergsen on the Fiddlesticks mid these last two games and playing more of the tanky supportive role. So I
Yeah.
just gave it to Doublelift ultimately.
Okay, so let's be honest now. You gave it to Doublelift because he popped off in fantasy.
No.
Just kidding. Okay, moving on to
Although he did pop off for my fantasy team.
moving on to the worst performer in TSM. You got Broken Blade, and I went with Speaka. Tell me why Broken Blade.
Yeah, I think for me it was sort of similar to my solo, you know, thought process. Broken Blade, I've been really, I don't want to say upset, but I've just been disliking TSM drafts, and their willingness to do these safe picks, and they're just throwing Broken Blade on these super blind picky champions. Like he's played Aatrox, Ornn, and Set, pretty much the three blind pick champions that you can pick in any spot. But I don't know, I just and with that, there hasn't been any action towards top side. Pretty much Broken Blade's been playing weak side pretty much all four games. They're not throwing any jungle resources top lane, and it's a bit of like I said with my solo thought process. And he's not doing anything. He's not getting resources. He's not really losing. He's not really losing so much, but he's just not doing anything.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. There's just not much happening for him. But for me, I still had to go with Spica, which I also felt a little bit bad about this one as well because, well, for a couple of reasons. One is that yeah, he looked really, really bad on the Kane. However, to me, that's more of a draft and team issue than it is a him issue. Um, I don't think that you should have been drafting Kane on Spica unless you really were confident that he was going to perform on it. However, he didn't, and maybe he asked for it. That's not something we know. But also, I think the problems stem more than just that one game and just that one performance. So that's why I feel a little bit bad about giving it to Spica. Um, but anyways, I ultimately I had to go with him. Sorry, I'm just getting some messages here. I ultimately had to go with him mostly because of the Kane performance, which really seemed to me to just cost them the game.
Yeah, Spica also popped off in fantasy for me, but I think Spica's actually been doing a decent job so far. You know, minus the Kane game, I sort of agree with you, and I think it's more of a drafting issue than it was a Spica issue. Surely, I don't know about what he's doing in solo queue, but surely Kane is not a priority champion in scrims or a fairly well practiced in scrims. I know in a vacuum it's a good pick into Trundle, but you know you got to take into consideration with LCS and the LCS playstyle, and as we mentioned, NA's slow playstyle, and we saw that he only got that form change off at like 20, 24, 23 minutes. So more of a drafting issue, like you said. But I think actually Speak has been forming better than expected for me.
Yeah. Next up on the list, we got Golden Guardians. You and I both went with Closer.
Yeah, you know, we mentioned in our last podcast, closer, kind of similar to Blabber in his play style with and Golden Guardians drafting similar to C9, where they're willing to put their eggs in the closer basket. We've seen a Graves game from him. We've seen two Nidalee games from him now, and you know, in all three of those games, he's managed to get early leads and pressure the enemy jungler and deny him camps and you know get up like a good 20, 30 CS. And you know, I think this guy is a really good jungler, and I think their problems stem from a little bit more of their drafting as a whole and drafting overall. But I think he's still been performing really well. He consistently gets leads on the enemy jungler, and he's one of the primary reasons why I think Golden Guardians is looking good moving forward.
Yeah, and I don't really have too much more to add other than what you just said. So I completely agree. I think he's the right guy to be playing around, and he is their star performer. Um, as far as their worst performer, you and I both went with who he. I was a little bit more reluctant than you were. Tell me why you were so quickly to go with who he is the worst performing player.
Yeah, I think he has two Thresh games now in through 4 games so far, and they really just stick out in my mind because I don't think I'm trying to think of a meaningful hook that he ever hit, and he consistently was missing hooks on like stunned and slowed targets, like pretty much free hooks that any player with a brain should be hitting. But I don't know. I just he's been super underperforming. I know I don't think it's, solely his fault. He is new, sort of in like a role swap, and we saw this Golden Guardians experiment last split with Keith and Huhi, and I think sort of it's a product of that, but he hasn't been doing himself any favors either.
Yeah. So to me, the reason why I was a little reluctant here was mostly because of his performance against Cloud9 specifically yesterday. Now, there were some times, some moments where like he was trying to force a fight and it just wasn't happening. However, I think a big part of why they were in the game was his engage on Sven in the bot lane on Aphelios. That was the flash clamp, so to speak, on set. And so I did think that he was also making plays as well as giving up some plays, so to speak. So um, I think you get the good with the bad with Huhi. However, you get a little bit more bad than good, and that's why I did ultimately go with him in the bot lane there, um, or rather as support. Next up on the list, we got 100 Thieves. Who's 100 Thieves' best and obviously best performer?
Yeah, it's someday. I think for both best and worst for this team, it was fairly obvious.
Yep.
Someday is the carry player for 100 Thieves, although I do think they haven't been doing him any favors in draft. Similar to Broken Blade, he's constantly getting thrown on these blind pickable safe champions as opposed to drafting around him. In the last game of the week, 100 T versus IMT, we sort of saw 100 Thieves give him a little more aggressive pick in the Renekton. And that's, sort of what I want to see more out of 100 Thieves in their drafts and playing around someday because he's obviously their best player and strongest point in the map.
Yeah, so I definitely agree he's their best player. And the unfortunate thing is that the rest of the team has seemed so underwhelming that it's like today in League of Legends you can't play around one role every game because the other teams know exactly like what you're going to do and so it just gets exploited. However, if that's your only option, it's your only option. Like if he's the only one that's going to perform, then you have to do that. And so I completely agree. It sucks because they don't really have any other carry options. When it comes to their worst player, like I said, I do think their other four players have been underperforming. However, it has been very obvious that Stunt has looked out of place. Um, no pun intended, because he's been getting caught out a lot.
Yeah, there's a bit of a meme going around with Stunt where he averages 8 deaths a game whenever he plays Nautilus. But
Oh,
his the main problem I'm finding with Stunt, and I think it's kind of obvious to see in all of these games, is there's either a communication problem within 100 Thieves,
yes.
or he's just simply it's his fault in terms of his communication. He's constantly taking these fights and forcing these engages before his team is actually set up and there and in position. And, many times we've just seen Stunt either throw out a Thresh hook or a Nautilus hook, and then he's, 2 to 3 seconds ahead of the rest of his team, and he just instantly dies, and 100 Thieves then has to back off from the fight or concede objectives or concede towers or concede waves because of Stunt's mispositioning and early engages.
Yeah, and it's very obvious that he's just kind of running it down, honestly. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's just what we're seeing. Like you said, he doesn't seem to be on the same page with his teammates, which it's either his communication is poor with his team or he's just got no clue where he should be at what time. And so regardless of the reason, it leads back to his play, whether it's him or whether it's his communication, it's him. The issue comes back to him. Although I will say that and I hate to say it because I love Meteos, but he's not looked good so far this split. And the same thing last split, Meteos had a really slow start, so hopefully he can turn it around as the split goes on. But things not looking too good for 100 Thieves. Although it's worth noting they did start off with an extremely tough schedule, playing what we believe are the top three teams in the league.
Yeah, they've played Cloud9, EG, and Team Liquid. and obviously they got a win against Immortals in the last game of the week. But just I think it's pretty interesting. 100 Thieves sitting at 1-3 and CLG sitting at 3-1. It's kind of, if you were to reverse their schedules, I think they'd be in the opposite part of the standings, and we'll have to
Yeah.
see moving forward if 100 Thieves can pick up wins over the bottom teams like Dignitas or like Golden Guardians, and see even how they can test against the TSMs and the FlyQuests.
Yeah, and I just want to say I kind of misspoke there because I definitely think FlyQuest is one of the top 3 teams in the league. So rather, let's say 3 of the better performing teams in the league rather than top 3. Um, anyways, moving on to Immortals. Oh, I'll let you start with this team, man.
Yeah, to be blunt here, this team is a dumpster fire. Like I don't know how to. I'm trying to think myself what their thought process is going on just behind the scenes and with this split. I heard something on the broadcast which I didn't actually know because I don't watch any academy whatsoever. But last split, their academy team was ninth place. So I'm just trying to think how an organization who is subbing in players from their ninth place academy team thinks that they're going to have success in the actual LCS. It just doesn't make any sense to me. This team, their drafts are bad, their play is bad, and honestly, I have no hope, and there's no reason to get excited for this team unless we see some substitutions.
And who's the best performing of these worst players in the league?
I think he's actually
Yeah.
he's a decent player. Um, the main reason I was kind of on the fence with Immortals, both with their best and worst players, because I think all of these players are underperforming, and some of them are underperforming worse than others. But just in terms of SOAS, I was looking at some of the stats, but he's actually the highest damage share player on his entirety of his team, with getting the third most gold on the team. So I do think that's something sort of relevant, and it sort of shows that SOAS is, doing his job and doing it somewhat well with the lack of resources that he seems to be getting.
Yeah, and like we're saying here, we're not exactly expecting the most out of Soaz, and so like no one thought that he would come over and be a star over here. And this kind of does speak a little bit to our next topic about NA retirement home. Uh, Soaz wasn't coming over because he was ready to pop off. It seems like Immortals took him as a player that's been in his prime, and he's kind of been uh, he's past his prime. You're not expecting much out of him. However, he is still their best performing player. But that to me is more of a product of the rest of the team being bad than him being great. He's been okay, but I do remember saying while watching the Immortals games, it feels like he's an elo hell.
Yep.
Which I know that is harsh, but this team is just bad. And speaking of bad, who's the worst of the worst?
For myself, I put Altec and you put Gate, but I do think we're kind of on the same page here that their bot lane has some serious problems.
And I legit thought that out of all the players that they brought up from their academy squad, that Alltech would be one of the better performers. We've seen him in the LCS before, and he's been okay. Nothing amazing, but nothing bad. I don't think he's been their worst performer, but I can definitely see why you went with him. He did get caught out in what was the one game that they threw? Was that the CLG one? I
Yeah.
think that was the CLG one where he had no business being where he is. And to me, I went with Gate because of the game yesterday where he threw, so maybe a little bit of recency bias here. But I definitely had to go with Gate after he tried to engage on Meteos. That game, first of all, let's talk about how that game had nothing happen for 20 minutes, man. It wasn't until 24 minutes into the game that finally someone decides to make something happen, and it's the throw of the game. Gate finally makes something happen. He engages on Meteos. Meteos is Trundle, so he laughs, and then that was the game. Immortals ends up losing the team fight to 100 Thieves, and finally the game started to snowball. But it took forever. It took until 24 minutes, but ultimately Gate was the one to throw the game with his. I don't know what he was expecting to do to Meteos there, but sure, it happened, and that was the game.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on Immortals, or can we stop talking about this bad team and go next?
I fell asleep during their game against 100T, so
Yeah. Speaking of bad teams,
speaking of ELO hell,
Dignitas. Yeah. Oh my God, this team has been bad as well. However, You and I are decent fans of their best performer. You and I both went with Johnson. This is a guy that, for those that don't know, we have two friends that play solo queue against Johnson quite often, and so he's been hyped up very much within our friend group. So he's kind of become a fan of ours, or we've become a fan of his rather. And Johnson's been popping off despite the fact that his team has not.
Yeah, we kind of mentioned a little bit that so as in ELO Hell, and Johnson is most definitely in ELO Hell on this Dignitas team. One thing that, it's funny just to look back and just think about, but I don't want to bring this. Well, I'm gonna bring it up again, but it's been talked about quite a lot. But Dignitas ends up trading Vulcan away to Cloud9 to acquire John, and within that deal they acquired Johnson, and they used all the money that they got from C9 to sign Hooney to this long-term deal. But just really thinking about it, like your bot lane for season 10 could have been Johnson Vulcan. Imagine that bot lane.
Yeah.
And you have a different top laner than Hooney, who kind of just ran it down for a split. He got $1 million, ran it down, and got out of there. But
But
looking at this Dignitas team, you could have had Johnson Vulcan as your bot lane, but now you have Johnson Aframu or Johnson JJ if they make any substitutions. But Johnson has been the only shining spot on Dignitas. He popped off in their almost win. It was the third game. He was playing. Was he playing Callista or he was playing Ashe or something? I don't exactly remember, but he was popping off.
So the reason I went with Johnson was because of the Ash game. It wasn't so much that Ash isn't exactly like a high skill cap champion or anything like that, but the 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 um the champion pool was really pinched in that draft. I think there was like 5 or 6 AD carries that were banned, and I remember him still kind of popping off in lane. Which you got to give credit to both him and Afro, but they were still winning lane despite having a lot of their champion pool taken away. So that was the main reason I went with Johnson, not because the team's been doing great and he's been carrying their games. Unfortunately, I don't think he's in a situation that he can carry. But to me, God, that team's looked bad, and he's been, like you said, he's been the only shining star there, so to speak. As far as their worst performer, I did not expect to have to say Froggen, but he has looked awful. He's looked way out of place. What are your thoughts on Froggen?
Yeah, I mean, it's just super interesting. I mentioned previously in the drafting errors with Dignitas' draft and them early picking LeBlanc on blue side to counter this Twisted Fate pick. It ultimately I think lost him the game. You know, I would hope just for Froggen's sake that that's a drafting issue from the coaching staff as opposed to him calling for this early LeBlanc pick because I think that lost him the game. But other than that game, he's been stuck on Orianna 3 other games and pretty much he just sits there and farms. He really doesn't
And
do anything. He kind of plays for himself and doesn't do anything around the map, and he's just there hitting minions. He's Apollo-ish like that. He just hit minion.
he's had a reputation of being a so-called selfish player for some time now. Like there's people talked about it for so many years where he would always go and get raptors instead of getting vision down somewhere and things of that nature. Um, However, to me, the LeBlanc is a pick that is like usually you have the mid laner say yes, give me the LeBlanc and I'll carry the game. That's one of those picks where it's like the coaching staff usually looks over at the mid laner like, hey, if I give you LeBlanc here, you're gonna do something with it, and like they'll either say yes or no, I can't play it here. Yes, I can play it here, and that was a game where he did nothing with it, man. Like you were saying, nothing happened. He got caught out a few times. I was really surprised at the way Dignitas played into the Twisted Fate, and he got caught out by Twisted Fate a few times. Um, really, really underwhelming performance out of Froggen, but just the team in general. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to Dignitas is it panic button time? Is it time to put in the subs that are eh? Like, are we putting in Dardoch? Are we putting in Lorlo? Is JJ getting the call, or are we just running it back?
Yeah, I think you definitely. I think with these bottom two teams in Immortals and Dignitas, we need to see some changes. Whether that's one role, two roles, or three roles. But I think changes need to be made because so far these teams look a little hopeless.
I really, really want to see. I hope that they're giving some scrim time to JJ so that he can get used to playing with Johnson. But I am in the throw all three of them in. I'm I'm on that side of the fence. The put them all in, see what happens, because nothing of what you're getting right now looks to me to be even close to success.
Yeah, I think the main problem, like with Dignitas and Immortal, is that they've actually had a relatively easy schedule so far. Both of these teams, Dignitas has played games against what I think Golden Guardians, TSM. Dig played Golden Guardians, TSM, uh, Team Liquid, and CLG, and Immortals played 100 Thieves, TSM, FlyQuest, and CLG. And both of these teams, they have yet to play C9 and EG. And then they each, one of them has to play Team Liquid and one of them has to play FlyQuest. So I think the tougher part of the schedule is coming up for them. And with these teams sitting at 0-4 and you know lost to some of the so-called easier teams in the league, I think it's going to be hard for them to pick up wins.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Um, the only thing, you know what? It looks like the only chance that Immortals and Dignitas have at wins is against each other. Maybe CLG as well, but um, I digress on beating up on those three teams for now. Any other things before we move on to our popping off and bean soup awards?
Nope.
All right, I'll let you start off because I got a couple and I don't want to duplicate this week. I want to have some different awards. So I'll let you start off with your popping off award. Who you got?
For pop off, I went Player of the Week, Santorin. I think
Okay.
he had a really good performance. I know he's been kind of doing trundle duty, but I do think, as you mentioned before, he's been super super good in just knowing where to be on the map and just being involved in plays and setting his team up for success with this trundle pick. I think he's been playing really well. Like I said earlier in our best player for FlyQuest, I thought it was really close between Ignar and Santorin, but specifically this week, Santorin played really really well.
Yeah, so that was one of my choices, so I won't go with that one. But let's go Santorin. My other popping off award was just Blabber. Even though he didn't look that great in their second game this week, that, like I said earlier, that was one of the most stomp performances I've seen in so long. And yes, even counting the perfect game, to me, that was way more of a stomp than the perfect game that EG had over CLG. And I think you see what happens when Cloud9 says, Blabber, take the wheel. And oh my god, did he absolutely pop off. So to me, I'm going to go with Blabber for this week.
Yeah, Blabber definitely played really well this week. Pop off on the Olaf, as we talked about. For Bean Soup, though, I went with the Immortals bot lane in Altec and Gate. We sort of touched on this a little bit already in our worst players for Immortals, but they need to get subbed out. Honestly, they need to get subbed out.
What about Xmithy?
Sub that guy in too, but their bot lane needs to be subbed out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was another one that I had for Bean Soup. However, I'm going to go a little bit off here with my Bean Soup award this week because this is something that is so overdue, and I've talked to you about this many times. Twitch, please, for the love of God, make it so that we can rewind the games. Please. Like, it's not that hard, man. YouTube's been doing it for years. Please make a rewind mechanic so we can go back and check some of the stuff. Twitch, you are Bean Soup this week. Bean Soup as fuck goes to Twitch.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to see like YouTube viewership has taken over the Twitch viewership now because for me I've been watching on YouTube. I exclusively watch on YouTube ever since like season 5, season 6, mainly just because you can rewind a little bit and if you miss something in the game, you can play it back or for whatever reason if you miss the start of the game, you can go back and sort of speed through the early game, but I definitely do think Twitch needs to add some sort of replay function.
It's funny to me because from what I can tell, a lot of people want to watch on Twitch. Like that's where like you get your Twitch chat. I know not everyone's huge on Twitch chat, but like that's where you get the better engagement. Twitch chat to me is so much better than YouTube live chat or whatever.
It's funny actually because YouTube they have the chat disabled on their stream.
That's true.
And
That's
they
right.
still
That's
outnumber
true.
them.
Yes. So if that doesn't even speak more volumes to how much people just want to be able to rewind the games or even pause the game too, like, for the love of God, please Twitch. I don't need to go any more into that. Anything else that you want to talk about for our popping off and Bean Soup awards? Anything you want to touch on before we move on to our next topic?
Nah.
All right. So our next topic for this week is the NA retirement home question mark. There was a recent Reddit post about how all the LCS players, not all the LCS players, but the average age of LCS players tends to be a lot higher than in the other leagues. Um, I'll let you. You got a graphic for that to pull up there?
No, but I can just give them the numbers. But like Jamie
Yeah,
said,
go for it.
you know, the average age of pro players, specifically in the LCS, is much, much higher than the rest of the world. So for LCS, the average age of a player is 23 years old. In Europe, it's about just over 21 years old. LCK, same as sort of Europe, just over 21 years old. And for LPL, 20 and a half. So,
And to me, one of the more telling things is that the LCS Academy average age is 21.9. So the fact that the LCS Academy players, this is a system that is supposed to find new talent, is older than the LPL as a league. So that to me speaks volumes, and the fact that well, it's not even just higher than the LPL; it's higher than the LCK and the LEC. So that's a little telling to me. However, I'm not totally sold on the NA retirement home argument. Um, a couple things. One, yes, there are some players that highly indicate that is a retirement home player, like Soaz, for example. This is someone that he's past his prime. You know, like we know what we're getting when we get Soaz. He used to be an amazing player for Fnatic. He's seen better days, and more harping on Immortals, of course, but Aka as well. Like people talk about Aka as if he's a new player, but he's not that young. I don't remember how old he is, but people are kind of deceived by this guy being a young talent. Oh, and wait and see what we get from Aka, but he's been in EU Masters for some time now, and Aka's not exactly young either. So I do understand the arguments for NA retirement home. However, when it comes to NA, there's also just a smaller player base to choose from. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see some of these players like Meteos, like Xmithy, sticking around for so much longer because NA doesn't necessarily have the talent to replace these players just like that.
yeah, I mean, just from what you said about Aka, people don't actually know, but like you said, he's been in EU Masters for quite a long time, and he's actually technically been in the scene ever since 2016. So, you know, people who didn't know who he was sort of thought he was this new player, and it's like, oh, let's see, we'll give him a chance. But, he's actually been around for quite a long time, and from what we've seen in him last split and this split, again, not too much to get excited about.
Yeah, and another topic that kind of came up with people recently talking about NA being the retirement home region is about scouting in some of these other regions. Now, uh, I don't know if this is absolute fact, so please take this with a grain of salt. But I have heard that if a player is from Korea, for example, but has not yet played in the LCK or LEC or any other region, that player can be taken over to NA and is no longer taking up an import slot. So if that is in fact true, I think that really goes to show how poor the scouting is from NA over in other regions. However, even if that is not true, we still get players like Ryoma and like Aka that are taking up import slots where to me there has to be a better Chinese or Korean player, or even European player than Aka and Ryoma. To me, it seems like there's maybe the scouting is falling a little bit short because I'm positive there has to be another player, especially in China, that has such a massive player pool to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, we just see so many of these recycled players that are continuing to see play on various teams and that have been in the league for so long. Just kind of to tie with this point as well, but there was another Reddit post that I saw this week, but it spoke specifically about the average time a player is in the professional scene, and it was comparing uh, the LCS to the LEC and how the LEC average time that a player is in the scene is so much smaller than in North America because we see that these European teams, they're willing to put these rookies in and they're willing to give them a chance. Whereas in NA, it just seems to be, like you said with the scouting, maybe it's not good enough or they're falling a bit short, but they're just willing to reuse these players that have been in the scene for so long. There's plenty of players in NA that have been in the scene for 5+ years, and over in Europe, it's pretty much unheard of unless you're on like a G2 or Fnatic.
And one of the things I wonder is if maybe the NA orgs have considered, let's have a scout in China or in Europe or whatever region, honestly. But maybe they don't have the funding to do that. Maybe they do have the funding, they just don't think it's worth the funding. I have no idea. But what I do know is that NA is hurting for talent, and it's pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, I think one of the big like systematic problems that we see in NA is it sort of seems like the academy system is where players go when they're no longer at an LCS caliber, which I think is the complete like opposite mindset and approach that I think they tried to say in the beginning is they wanted academy to be developing players to bring them up into LCS. Or that doesn't seem to happen
Yeah.
at all. It's pretty much when a player loses their LCS level, they go down to academy. So it's just you're sending downgrades into a league as opposed to trying to make upgrades for your primary league.
Yeah, it feels like a mix of both. Like you got some young guys in there, but then you got some guys that have no business ever making it back to the LCS.
Yeah, like
Sorry Darshan, but that's who I'm thinking of is when players like, look, this guy is past his prime. You're not getting Darshan back in the LCS again, and if you are, then you have bigger problems than your academy team if you have Darshan on your LCS squad.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to like try to understand what Riot could actually do to fix these problems, but I do think one thing you could potentially do is just make some cap that if this player has played this many games in LCS and they're no
Oh,
longer worthy of an LCS starting spot, then they shouldn't be in academy. Like
spicy.
I know we're just using Darshan as an example here, but like that, there's no fucking chance in hell that guy's getting another starting spot in the LCS. And if you are, you're failing at your job, and there's clearly better players that you could be picking up. So like
Okay, so
let's say
just
for example you played I don't know the number of games. If there's 18 games in a season, you've played a total of like 70 something games, and then at that point you're no longer like allowed to be an academy, and because your time is up.
they just give him the boot. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, you just give them because you're not in teams, and the LCS is not gaining anything from having all these older declining players in academy. They gain nothing as opposed to putting these rookies in or finding new talent and grooming them for LCS. They can gain a
Yeah.
future star. Look at Cloud9. Many players that have passed through the Cloud9 system are now either on Cloud9 as top players or have gone to other teams and become top-ish players. Like you got players like Zazel and Kumo who are on EG. They're performing well. They're doing well, and they came
So
through the C9 system. And you look at Blabber, he's probably the best player in the league, or if not one of the best players in the league. And he was a project. Cloud9 recognized that, oh, this is a kid with a bunch of mechanical talent that we're going to put our time and effort into, and it's going to pay off, and it has.
I gotta play devil's advocate here. This is a scenario that is incredibly unlikely to happen, but still possible. What if Xmithy was for some reason kept in Academy for so long that Xmithy got the boot from Academy? Because that's something that is happening right now. Like Xmithy doesn't belong in Academy, but he is one of the older players, and he has who knows how long he will be there. Doesn't it seem wrong to kick Xmithy from Academy?
It Yeah, well that's true, but I think we all recognize that he's more deserving of an LCS spot than other teams. So even if for whatever reason he wouldn't be able to compete in Academy, I think like for example, if he wasn't able to compete in Academy at all this split and he never got picked up by an LCS team this split because teams didn't want to make changes or whatnot, I think he would most likely he would find a new home at the start of season 11
I think
because he's
so
that
too.
good of a player.
Yeah, I agree, but I had to play devil's advocate there. Anything else before we move on to our week 3 game picks?
Nope, I think that's it.
Let's pull them up here. We're going to go through our picks and make a recommendation on what game you guys should watch later this week.
Should be up there right now.
Do you want to inform the Twitch chat and the viewers on YouTube of who is currently winning so far this year for our picks?
Oh yeah. Oh, I don't think I have it pulled up here, but Jamie's actually winning so far over 2 weeks of our picks. He's 16-4, and I'm 14-6.
Ooh, dab on them, baby.
Yeah, mainly last week we both got the CLG games wrong, and I picked Immortals over 100T because I thought they would make a substitution, but they didn't, and they obviously lost for it.
Oh, that's right. That's true. Yeah, we did talk about. I forgot about your pick about how you thought they would sub, and maybe they should have. Well, not maybe they should have subbed, but regardless, let's get right into it. The first game this week on Friday Night League is FlyQuest versus CLG. I know for a fact what team you're picking. I think.
FlyQuest.
Yes. This is an easy FlyQuest to me. Now I know CLG's 3-1. We talked about it. They're winning games. If CLG wants to be a good team in the league, these are the games that they're going to have to win. So while I am on the opinion that no game is ever for sure, I don't see CLG beating a top-ranked team in the league. I think that they're lucky to be 3-1.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely a bit weird that both of these teams are sitting at 3-1 because I think everyone in the league, including the both of us, values FlyQuest so much higher than CLG. And
Yeah.
I'd be very surprised if CLG won this game.
Yep. And the next game on the list is TL versus C9. This is going to be our game of the week. If you're looking for a game to watch this week, it's definitely this one. You got TL sitting in second place at 3-1, and C9 sitting at 4-0 after the first 2 weeks. This game is at 10 p.m. EST. If you guys are wondering, definitely a game to definitely want to watch.
Yeah, I think with this game, what's really, really interesting is the side selection that these teams have right now. Because C9, like we say, they want to play around Blabber, and we've seen, I don't know if it's in 2 or 3 of their games, they're first picking Olaf on blue side. So I think it's a little bit interesting the way that the draft can play out in this game, with C9 one having counterpick, which they're not too often saving their solo lanes for counterpick, but I think it'll be a very interesting game. But I'm gonna go with C9.
Yeah, I got to go with C9 as well. I thought that we'd be talking about the top 2 teams in the league going into this matchup. However, TL did fall to EG earlier this week, so I think that's still up for debate. But the most interesting thing about this game to me is that if C9 wins this game, I think they're very well set up to go 9-0 the first half of the split. What do you think?
Yeah. The only other difficult game you could say they have is TSM, and we saw that TSM was their only loss last split. But
The Cloud9 kryptonite, if you will.
yeah, no, I like you say though, if they win this game, I do think they're in a really good position to go 8-1 or 9-0.
I don't want to be the guy that starts talking about a perfect season because last split I think C9 was 4-0 or 6-0 when people started talking about whether they were going to have a perfect split. No, that is too early. That is way too early. So we'll start talking about the first half, and then maybe if they're 9-0 after the first half, we can consider. The next game on the list is CLG versus 100 Thieves. This is the first game on Saturday. That should be at 4 p.m. EST. Who you got in this one?
This is a bit of a tough one, actually. Like you just mentioned, it's again surprising that CLG is sitting at 3-1, and you know, looking at their wins, they've been up against weaker teams, but I still think I'm going to take 100 Thieves. Um, it's just hard for. We haven't seen CLG go up against like even a decent team. Honestly, their wins have been against bad teams. So Golden Guardians win wasn't. It's a good win, but I think it was more Golden Guardians bad draft and losing the game than CLG winning the game. But I'm gonna go with 100 Thieves. I think this is a really close game. I think it's a necessary win for both teams if they want to be considered a playoff team. I think 100 Thieves, like you can't go 1-4 in your first 5 games and expect to make an easy playoff push.
Oh, but you're forgetting 8 teams make the playoffs now
Oh yeah,
for
whatever.
some reason. I totally I'm right there with you though with your point. Like if you wanna say that you're a team that can compete with the others, these are games you have to win. Because if either team if you lose this game, you're bottom tier. Like you're really getting down there. I'm also gonna go with 100 Thieves. I don't think it's that easy of a pick just because of how bad 100 Thieves has looked. But like we've said, they've had a really tough schedule. There's only one game they should have won, and they won it. So I'm going to stick with 100 Thieves on this one. Should be a close game. Next up, we got TSM and EG. I'm going to go with EG on this one. I just think they're the better team. I thought that they were going to lose to TL, but they surprised us, or surprised me anyways, and they took the win on that one. Who you got taking this one?
I'm gonna go with TSM on this one. I think we've sort of talked about Jizuke as the primary carry, and one thing I think that Bjergsen is really good at doing is neutralizing the enemy mid laner. He's not necessarily known as the super proactive player who's constantly getting mid shove and roaming around the map like Niski. Bjergsen's one to sort of stick to his lane and trap his enemy laner into just laning with him. So I'm gonna go with
And
TSM.
this again is one of those games where if you want to prove yourself, you got to start beating some of these teams because TSM, I think they view themselves as a top team in the league. I don't think other people are viewing them there yet. So hey, if you want to be a top team, you got to beat EG here. So should be a really good game. Next up, we got Dignitas and TL. Who do you got in this one?
Um, we haven't heard the word yet about Dignitas substitutions, but I would think that some Dignitas substitutions are going to be coming in, and for that reason, and even if they were to not make any substitutions, I'm going to go with Team Liquid. I think their Team Liquid's outclassing them in every role individually. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe in a straight up 1v1 Johnson might be better than Tactical, but it's a 2v2 obviously, and Core DJ's a beast, so.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. To me, there's not a lot of thought for me to put into this one. I don't think it matters which players Dignitas puts in. I think TL is a better team, and I think they're going to show that on Saturday.
Next up, we got Immortals versus Golden Guardians. I think this one is actually a little more difficult to judge because, again, if I'm Immortals, you got to be subbing players in at this point, and I still haven't really decided yet, but I think if Xmithie is actually playing and Apollo and Hakuo are also playing, I think it's actually a pretty close game because Xmithie is again sort of known to just be a solid presence in the jungle role, and like I just mentioned with Bjergsen, he's often sort of known to just neutralize the enemy jungler and just make the enemy jungler play to his tempo and his style. So I'm gonna still go with Golden Guardians though because I think Immortal should have made a
Hmm.
sub last week and they didn't, and I don't think they're gonna make one now. Even
So
though even though they should.
here's the way I look at this. If Immortals doesn't sub their players in, we're doomed. Careful, you're breathing into the mic a little bit. But if they do, we got a little bit of a matchup here. Like I think Golden Guardians has been so hard this split because in week one they looked really good, right? I thought like wow, they really surprised us. This might be a team that actually pushes in the playoffs. And then they lost to CLG. And then now it's a head scratcher, right? So I don't know what to think, but I do think that regardless, I think it'll be a competitive game, whether Immortals subs or doesn't sub. But I'm gonna go with Golden Guardians just because I think it's about a 75% chance on Golden Guardians coming out with this one.
Next game, first game on Sunday is Hunter T versus TSM. I'm gonna go TSM on this one. I think it's somewhat obvious,
Yeah,
but
I want to do it. I want to go with the upset here, but they have one of the five players looking good on 100 Thieves, man. I don't know how I can go with 100 Thieves. I want to go with the upset, but I can't. I'm going to go with TSM as well.
yeah, I think it might be interesting to see how the two matches play out on Saturday because, for example, let's say
Yeah.
Hunter T has a nice convincing win against CLG and TSM were to drop against EG, it's definitely closer than I think it looks right now.
You read my mind. I was thinking this is one of those games where I want to cheat. I want to wait until
Yeah, yeah,
Saturday
yeah.
and then make a prediction. For sure, that's one of those games you want to cheat on. But nonetheless, I'm going to go with TSM. You're going to go with TSM. Next up, we got C9 and Immortals.
Cloud9 next.
Anybody in the world taking Immortals? I want to know what odds Immortals is getting on this game. If the
4 to
betting
1
sites are not
or
giving
5 to
anything
1.
more than no, it has to be more than that though. That's so bad, right? Like if you're not getting 10 to 1 on Immortals, like how much would you have to be getting to take Immortals here?
6 plus.
To me that's not enough. I want 10, I want at least $10 on the dollar if I'm taking Immortals, and even that I'd probably still take Cloud9. Next, we got Golden Guardians and FlyQuest. I'm hoping for a good game out of this one. I want to see the good Golden Guardians show up, and I want to see one of those games like we saw with them against TL last week. It was a really close game between Golden Guardians and TL. That's the kind of game that I'm looking for in this one specifically. Who do you got, Golden Guardians or FlyQuest?
Yeah, this one's actually a close and interesting game, I think. We kind of have like opposite jungle play styles in this, with Closer wanting to take the more aggressive and farming junglers, and Graves and Nidalee, and Santorin kind of just sticking to trundle duty. And we've seen in the games with Golden Guardians in the pat, or just in these most recent games, Closer's really been able to bully the enemy junglers. You know, we saw against Broxa, invading his jungle level 3, blowing his flash, and with the Graves, solo killing Acadian. So I think it's really interesting. I think it really depends on draft this one, and I think I'm actually still going to take FlyQuest, but I think this will be a really interesting game. Another kind of game to watch if you're looking to watch some good LCS games, I think.
Yeah, and this one should be on, I think, around 6 o'clock on Sunday. But if you are curious about the schedule, you can just go to lolesports.com and you'll find the schedule on there, which is exactly what we're looking at right now for this. I got to go with FlyQuest as well. I think this one's interesting because we've talked about how Santorin's been their star player. Well, so has Closer, and so you're really expecting a good jungle matchup. And if there's something that's going to take down FlyQuest, it should be a jungler like Closer. So that's why I think this should be a good game to watch. But yeah, nonetheless, FlyQuest for me. The last game on our list is EG versus Dignitas. I got to go with EG. Dignitas, I don't have any faith in them at the moment. Who you got?
I'm gonna go with Dignitas because they're gonna be tilted after losing to TSM, and I don't know. I'm gonna take one upset this week, and I was kind of deciding between if I was gonna take Golden Guardians as my upset, but I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with Dignitas because I think
Didn't you take TSM over EG? That's an upset.
I don't think that's an upset.
Oh, that's an upset.
That's taking like I think that game's a 60-40.
Okay. All right. Well, nonetheless, I'm going to give you props for taking two upsets this week, whether you want to count it or not. I'll give you props for that, and I think it's pretty cool that you have some faith in Dignitas on this one.
I just think EG's gonna get tilted. Bang is gonna get mad. He's like, I can't control my teammates or something like that.
Hey, maybe you're right. Hopefully, we see Johnson absolutely pop off.
That's what we
But
want to see, baby.
yeah, I mean, hey, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind seeing that myself. Any other thoughts for this episode as we come to a close here?
No, there's actually some pretty good games this weekend. I think there's four, four pretty good and interesting games.
Yeah,
That
I'm.
being TLC9, EGTSM, Golden Guardians FlyQuest, and 100T TSM.
Yeah, I'm definitely hyped for the Friday Night League. I'm really fired up for TLC9. I think that, like I said before, this is the game C9 needs to win to push for that 9-0 perfect half start. But we'll see how that one goes. Anything else before we close out the episode?
No, I think that's it. Thanks everyone for watching, talking in the chat a little bit. Just for future episodes, feel free to drop a question in the chat during the stream if you have a question that you want to ask or have something to say. But
Yep, and for anybody in the chat, sorry to cut you off, for anybody in the chat who isn't following yet, feel free to drop a follow on the channel and to follow us on Twitter. Our Twitters are on the screen there if you want to go and look up the VOD. Thank you so much for stopping by, and thanks for everyone who's been in the chat as well.
yeah, thanks. See you guys next Monday.